What happens when we put a shoe on this foot that is arguably, really, I don't think it's arguable to scientists. It's been quite well established that the foot was designed to support itself over great distances without a shoe.
Yeah. So what happens when you put a shoe on? I think people are really struggling to understand the answer to it's such a simple question, isn't it? Like biomechanically, you just think, well, go on a treadmill and we'll film you in slow motion and we'll be able to see exactly what happens in a shoe. We do know that some things happen. So running shoes usually have a heel to toe differential. So there's a sort of slight platform aspect. And what that means is it alters the runner's gait, so that nearly all runners end up running onto their heel. So when you take away all of that cushioning, what happens is, without thinking, if they're on a hard surface, it doesn't work on things like wet sand. But if you're on a hard surface, everybody switches over to either a forefoot or what's called a midfoot strike. Midfoot strike is when kind of the whole foot, the front and back, the toes, everything comes down at exactly the same point. A forefoot strike is when it's obviously the forefoot comes down. And
that is the more natural version of running, where the spring action comes in from the...
Yeah, so in the olden days, before shoes were invented, people had high arches in their feet. And this arch is created by 4 layers of arch muscles. It doesn't exist in your skeleton. The arch doesn't exist in your skeleton. It's the arch is really made by the muscles pulling the metatarsals and the phalanges back towards the heel. It's a muscle pulling it back and creating an arch where we kind of vault away from the earth. And then what happens is, as when the forefoot strikes, the heel then comes down afterwards. And then as our center of gravity passes over the foot, about 2.5 times our body weight gets loaded into that arch, and it springs back with such force in a person whose arches are functioning correctly. It springs back with such force that it actually returns 15%. Actually, I think it might be 17% of our body weight. So just that simple mechanism saves you having to lift 15% of your body weight with every foot strike.
And that adds up a lot over
that adds up
miles.
Incredibly quickly. And if you think what's 15% of your body weight, and you do let's say 1,600 steps per mile. Just going to get a calculator going here.
Get some trigonometry. Yeah. Some...
So 1,600 steps or 1,600 multiplied by... we're working in pounds, aren't we?
Yeah, right. Unfortunately.
That's over... If you run a mile, that means you've saved £7,000.
Wow. Conversely... You've absorbed it on your heel. It shoots up your legs, your knees, your back.
Yeah.
All those injuries.
So there's always shock in a foot strike. Shock always moves up the body with a foot strike. But what it looks like is that it's very hard to describe on a podcast. But what you get is, if you measure the shock of a foot strike for someone that's a 4-foot runner, what you get is a very sort of smooth, like if you asked a child to draw a hill.
Like a parabolic, really.
Yeah, you get a smooth parabola. But if you give somebody a cushioned shoe, the way that the heel comes down means that the shock moves up the body. It happens much more quickly. So you get a very sharp spike followed by a parabola. And they are still trying to work out what this actually means for the human body. But, anybody, I think, that questions whether shock is bad for the human body, just look at a car accident. Shock and the human body don't get on all that well. So it looks like 4-foot running is much more natural. But for me, the biggest persuader is the historical argument, which is Eric Shinkhaus, who's a paleoanthropologist, published an article on this a few years ago. I forget what year it was, but he was looking at the emergence of shoes, and he was interested in whether our skeletons, the bones in our feet, especially fossilized bones in feet, had changed as a result of the invention of shoes about 40,000 years ago. And he found that they had the feet and the muscles and the muscle attachments on the bones had actually started to atrophy. So if you think that we've been wearing cushions, so my uncle didn't wear shoes at all, but that was unusual, even in the 1960s.
Right.
And then cushioned running shoes didn't really begin to appear until probably the late 80s. But bearing in mind, human DNA or hominin DNA, it goes back about 2.3 million years. We're not sure about, whether Homo habilis was an endurance runner, but we are absolutely sure that Turkana boy, who was a nearly complete Homo erectus skeleton discovered in Kenya, they are absolutely. Turkana boy has the full endurance suite. So he has the right holes in his skull for the vestibular ocular. I can never say this. Vestibular. Let's call it the vestibular system.
Better you than me. Keeps the head from falling over on running, right?
Yeah. So it means you can bob your head from side to side. So if you did it now on the Zoom with me, you'd still be able to focus on my face really, really easily.
Stable vision.
And if I held up a piece of paper for you to read, you could move your head from side to side.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
And you'd still be able to read it. If you did it the other way, with your head going up and down, you wouldn't be able to do anything. So it's a system that's really optimized for that side-to-side shift. That and Turkana boy has that. He has the right holes around his ears, around his skull for that. So we've been runners for about 2.3 million years.